Cast your mind back to the height of the Cold War. The ever-accelerating nuclear arms race brought us closer than ever before to making the nightmare of nuclear Armageddon a terrifying reality. The two main parties in this conflict are the United States and Soviet Union, each amassing huge amounts of nuclear warheads and jumping on any available advantage they can over their enemies. What you may not know is that in order to detect an impending attack from the United States, the Soviets developed what would become known to the West as the Dead Hand. But this experimental piece of technology also had another name, SCP-1984. It is no secret that the Soviet Union feared the threat of US nuclear strikes and invasion just as much as the US feared an attack from them. So SCP-1984 was created to act as a deterrence mechanism, specifically against secure second strikes. Secure second strikes were both a deterrent and overwhelming concern during the Cold War, referring to a country's ability after suffering an initial nuclear attack to still retaliate, firing on their enemy and causing untold damage with their own arsenal of nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union knew that any action they made that could be perceived as an attack on United States soil would be threatened with nuclear retaliation, and that if they fired first, America would return fire and potentially annihilate them with a second strike. SCP-1984 was to be an automated system that would activate in response to the destruction of the Soviets' main command and control structure. Given that the Dead Hand was created during the 80s, you might be forgiven for expecting a nuclear detection system built at this point in history to consist of various sensors connected to a computer network. But you have also probably already realized that if this was the case, then the Foundation wouldn't be so interested in it. In actuality, SCP-1984 is a fully autonomous entity rather than a network of sensors for detecting incoming nuclear strikes, or a computer capable of initiating a second strike. Perhaps what makes the Foundation more interested in the Dead Hand is that it is both self-aware and linked simultaneously to every single one of Russia's nuclear launch sites. Not only this, but SCP-1984 also has direct access to every single one of the atomic weapons stockpiled by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and is capable of launching intercontinental ballistic missiles at a moment's notice. In short, SCP-1984 could very easily and horrifyingly quickly trigger an all-out nuclear war, resulting in the extinction of all life on Earth. No wonder the Foundation considers the Dead Hand such a massive threat. SCP-1984 itself actually consists of the preserved remains of a Russian soldier by the name of Sergeant Marat Chernikov, who was killed during the Soviet-Afghan War in 1982. Most of the official documentation of Chernikov's existence has been expunged by the Russian Federation, and he is only referred to in fragmented documents recovered by the Foundation that refer to a Project December. These remains serve as the location of a semi-sentient consciousness that has been classified as SCP-1984-01. When it remains dormant and is not interfered with, SCP-1984-01 has the ability to receive and process any signal broadcast to it, and is able to decipher information combined in any signal it picks up. However, when global military tensions start to climb, especially when those tensions affect the Russian Federation, or what were once the satellite states of the former Soviet Union, the entity begins to manifest itself in the physical world, and usually in various strange and different ways. SCP-1984-01 has been known to appear in the real world in forms such as a humanoid outline, or a bright red specter taking the shape of a child with its legs cut off. Regardless of which shape it appears in, it is when the Dead Hand manifests in a more physical form that the wider scope of its abilities become clear. As mentioned previously, it can influence and even launch nuclear weapons, overriding their command systems and bypassing launch sequences. After appearing fully, SCP-1984-01 will travel at speeds of up to 140 kilometers an hour, directly to the nearest military installation capable of launching intercontinental ballistic missiles. Once it reaches its destination, SCP-1984-01 will immediately attempt to override the necessary systems to initiate a launch. After firing missiles at their predetermined targets, SCP-1984-01 will hastily travel to another facility housing nuclear ordnance, repeating the process until it has successfully launched all of Russia's atomic weapons. When engaged, the physical manifestation of SCP-1984 is highly aggressive and will lethally defend itself against anyone that it observes trying to interfere with it or stop it from causing a nuclear launch. The entity has displayed the ability to disrupt the nervous system, causing excruciating pain and debilitating damage to human beings. Its only known weakness, if any, is a susceptibility to microwave radiation. Although exposure to this does not seem to cause any lasting damage to SCP-1984, instead only temporarily disorienting its physical form. As for the origins of SCP-1984, the Soviet Union's official liaison with the SCP Foundation offered some clarity on this. Ironically, during early 1984, the liaison, a doctor named Sergei, described information regarding the Dead Hand as being of grave importance to the continued survival of the human race. Seeing as he was referring to an enemy that could single-handedly launch the Soviet Union's entire nuclear arsenal, he certainly had a point. A top-secret conference was held in Sarajevo between the Foundation's O5 Council and officials from both the USSR and the United States, using the 1984 Winter Olympics as cover, avoiding too many questions about several nations' high-ranking state officials being in the same place at once. The O5 Council was then given full, in-depth information about the Dead Hand, something they had previously assumed was a more conventional form of nuclear deterrence. SCP-1984 was far more, and worse, far out of the control of the Russian government. It was revealed that the entity had been designated outside the original specifications given to those who developed it. Initially, the Soviets had intended for the Dead Hand to be solely used as a secure second strike response. If the leaders of the Soviet Union were killed, SCP-1984 would react in kind to Russia's enemies, launching back all of the USSR's nuclear missiles in retaliation. This is more likely where the Dead Hand nickname comes from, hearkening to the idea of a dead man's switch. Picture that you had been mortally wounded by your worst enemy, shot in the stomach and laying on the ground, rapidly bleeding out. You know that there is no chance you will survive, but you cannot afford to let your enemy get away. What they don't know is that you rigged the entire building around you both with explosives. With your dying breath, you activate the detonator, assuring your own and your enemy's mutual destruction. Kaboom. Then curtains for both of you. The pressing issue, and the reason this secret summit between the USSR, USA, and SCP Foundation was held, was that SCP-1984 was no longer interested in just waiting for Russia to be attacked and only reacting after the fact. Instead, the entity's physical form was trying to preemptively strike at the enemies of the motherland, attempting to activate nuclear launches and send atomic weapons to destroy the United States, France, West Germany, and the People's Republic of China. In other words, the Dead Hand was eager to get a head start at causing total nuclear annihilation, not to mention potentially killing millions and reducing target countries to little more than irradiated craters, awash with deadly nuclear fallout. Both the Soviet Union and the United States begged the SCP Foundation to intervene and contain SCP-1984, and under the direction of the O5 Council, they stepped in to take direct control of the situation, establishing new containment procedures in the hopes of keeping SCP-1984 from hitting as many launch buttons as it could find. The embalmed remains that seemed to create the manifestations of the Dead Hand entity were held securely in an armed containment complex near Verkhoyansk, part of the Sakha Republic within the Russian Federation. SCP-1984 was placed within a standard humanoid containment cell, which was itself held within a Faraday cage, a type of enclosure constructed with or covered in conductive material designed to block electromagnetic fields. This was done to block any external broadcast signals from reaching SCP-1984, and thus causing it to manifest its other form if it learned of an impending attack on Russia, even a fictional one. perhaps as a part of a television broadcast. As part of the dead hand's containment, all signals broadcast near its cage are to be monitored, and only broadcasts featuring doctored information would reach the entity. Thankfully to the work of the SCP Foundation's Information Control Team, SCP-1984 is drip-fed a stream of carefully fabricated information. Using on-site equipment and facilities, a team of military historians, economists, actors, and Soviet media specialists, the Information Control Team have created an ongoing narrative wherein the Cold War never ended. Through falsified radio and television broadcasts made to look like era-appropriated news organizations, they managed to keep SCP-1984 convinced that the nuclear stalemate between the Soviet Union and United States is still ongoing. Unfortunately, sometimes information from the real world is able to bleed through. An incident involving SCP-1984 occurred on August 8, 1984, and almost brought forth a full-scale nuclear war. While preparing for a campaign speech, the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, uttered the following joke.
"I am pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes."
Naturally, thousands of media outlets reported on this, but signals of those broadcasts, including recordings of the president's remark, made their way to SCP-1984. Foundation researchers were both unsure of how these transmissions breached the Faraday cage surrounding the dead hand, and were unable to prevent what happened next. Hearing what it could only assume was a genuine declaration of war, the manifestation of the SCP-1984-01 entity happened immediately after Reagan's words reached its containment cell. This time, the entity appeared as a semi-transparent woman, withered and blue, wearing traditional Pashtun dress. Armed personnel guarding SCP-1984's cage engaged the entity, causing it to retaliate, lashing out and attacking any that stood in its way. One captain and 2 privates that suffered the brunt of SCP-1984's offensive capabilities began bleeding heavily from their ears, seizing violently. Most gruesomely of all, a liquid leaked from their eyes and nose believed to have been cerebrospinal fluid. While armed personnel attempted to use microwave-emitting weaponry to slow the entity down, the Information Control Team was frantically trying to record a new falsified broadcast, in the hopes that SCP-1984 would cease its hostilities and the entity would dissipate before it was able to travel at high speed to any nearby Soviet nuclear facilities and begin bombarding the United States. Their first attempt to record a new broadcast that would result in a cessation of SCP-1984's slaughter of its guards was interrupted when a nearby wall collapsed. Desperate to recontain the creature, the Information Control Team tried to film the broadcast a second time and succeeded, although one of the actors portraying a newsreader suffered a stroke and had to be edited out to convince the dead hand of its supposed authenticity. What followed was a short news clip clarifying that Russia's Politburo was in on President Reagan's joke, including old footage of the USSR's General Secretary Konstantin Chernenko, confirming that the Soviet Union's nuclear forces were not on high alert. Miraculously, after 15 more minutes of sustained fighting with guards, SCP-1984's physical manifestation began to disappear, gradually dematerializing while it seemed to attack with far less intensity. Eventually, containment was reestablished, at the cost of the deaths of 17 members of Foundation staff, both guards and researchers. A further 8, however, suffered traumatic brain injuries that left them all permanently disabled. The one upside is that this incident remains the only time SCP-1984 has ever breached its containment and caused harm to others. And considering that it could very well have launched Russia's nuclear arsenal, the casualties could easily have been much higher. So remember, folks, don't joke about nuclear weapons, especially if you're the president. You never know what anomalies lurking in the bodies of dead Russian soldiers might be listening, and if they are, you'd better hope they have a sense of humor. Now check out SCP-001 The Scarlet King and SCP-2935 O Death for more anomalies that could destroy the world.